First, though, let's bring in our political editor, Andrew Clennell. And Andrew, we'll talk about Victoria in a moment, but let's start with that dramatic news, that ASIO raid of a Labor MP's office on Friday.
That's right, Kieran. So the ASIO raids on the New South Wales Labor Upper House MP, Shoket Mosselmain, have led to speculation in Labor as to why the Victorian branch of the party has been suspended over branch stacking claims, and New South Wales Labor has not faced similar action, given the alleged incident involving its former General Secretary Jamie Clements taking a bag of cash from a man accused of being a Chinese agent. That's the accusation at ICAC. Another General Secretary in Kayla Murnane accused of covering that up, and now an ASIO raid on an MP's office. Mosselmain is said by Labor sources to be in Parliament for two reasons: his ability to branch stack or recruit, and his ability to fundraise. Labor sources have told me that Ernest Wong, who was also featured in ICAC hearings around Chinese donations and was drummed out of Parliament last election, was there to fundraise with the Chinese community, Mosselmain with the Islamic community, particularly in Sydney South, where he used to recruit from a mosque. Here is a photo from last year of Anthony Albanese at a fundraiser with Mosselmain, and a photo of Mosselmain with a panda at his door as he is raided. He has certainly made some comments very favourable to China and raised eyebrows. The questions around Mosselmain and the investigation seem to centre around, was he a pawn or was he a player? The reports have pointed more to his staffer John Zhang and what influence he might have had on the MP. Certainly Mosselmain has had some bizarre public comments backing China, including talking about a new world order involving China. But as one federal Labor MP said of Mita Mosselmain yesterday in his lowly status in politics and being investigated under the foreign interference laws, I don't see what capacity he would have to have influence. Here's an unusual rant Mosselmain had at his critics earlier this year after he made pro-China comments. It's a pamphlet which criticises media commentators and journalists Ray Hadley, Peter Credlin, Nick McKenzie and Peter Dutton. It says in March 2020, an extraordinary slanderous campaign was launched against Labor MP Shoket Mosselmain. It came from the far right of Australian politics. Here he actually mentions and defends his staffer because he says, Ray Hadley reported on April 2 that one of my listeners said, Ray, 2019, it was reported Mr Mosselmain hired a staffer who was trained at the Chinese Academy of Governance, a high-level training institution for Chinese communist officials. Mosselmain's rebuttal is, my staffer has been an Australian citizen for over 30 years, never been a member of the Chinese Communist Party. In 2012, as president of the Australian Shanghaiese Association, he attended a two-day forum for overseas Chinese community leaders, hardly high-level training. He also denies in this pamphlet talking about the obsolete scum of white Australia, as he's been quoted as doing, saying this was an incorrect Google translation, and he actually said it's the old white Australia fear of the yellow peril surfacing. One of Mosselmain's Macquarie Street colleagues referred to him as a dill, incapable of being a mastermind to me. But such was Mosselmain's branch recruiting power in the party, he was said to have assisted Bill Shorten beat Anthony Albanese with his numbers in the 2013 Labor leadership contest. There was lobbying at various points, including from head office then, to put Mosselmain in shadow cabinet, but he only made it to assistant president of the Legislative Council. Now, the foreign interference laws, which he's being investigated under, they came into effect in 2018. There's not been a prosecution yet in relation to them. Let's see if there's one now. Mosselmain and his staffer do not have the influence, however, that Sam Dastyari, for example, had, that's for sure. One federal Labor MP on Friday actually questioned the leaking of the raids. Brian Mitchell, the member for Lyons, this tweet, he calls the leaking of the ASIO raids to media corruption. Now, Anthony Albanese, he said he's rarely met the Victorian power broker Adam Somyurek, who was sacked from the party over branch stacking a fortnight ago, but he would have had conversations with Shoket Mosselmain more than 20 times, I'm told, but only at functions, according to sources close to the leader. Earlier this year, I interviewed Anthony Albanese and he was defensive about the level of influence from Chinese influence, shall we say, on the Labor Party. I want to ask you about, change the subject here and ask you about China and foreign influence in politics. How concerned are you about this in Australian politics? And have you yourself had any approaches you've been concerned about, been worried at all?
No, I've never had anything inappropriate occur at all to myself. But of course, both sides of politics have had issue.
Is it an issue of concern, though?
Well, of course, it's an issue of any involvement or attempted interference. Let's be clear, though, to put it in perspective. It's not just China that tries to influence Australian politics.
Andrew, let's look at a couple of other issues before we wrap up. And Scott Morrison had to deal with a little bit of a backbench revolt late last week. Talk us through it.
He had to intervene on Friday after a backbench revolt around nicotine vaping of all issues and a move to ban nicotine liquid importation, gazetted by regulation by Health Minister Greg Hunt without consulting the party room. Hunt has scarcely put a foot wrong during the pandemic, but on this he just didn't consult, and when the PM was caught short on it on the Ben Fordham program on 2GB on Friday, the PM acted, and the change has been put off for 6 months and sent to consultation. About 30 backbenchers, Kieran, signed this letter calling for the delay in consultation, bringing Trent Zimmerman from the left of the Liberal Party and George Christensen from the National Party together. That's never been seen before. Hunt's point would be that nicotine vaping is banned by every state and territory anyhow, but the letter from the MPs said George Christensen and Matt Canavan established a petition against these changes, and that has been signed by more than 52,000 people in 24 hours. We have never seen a public reaction like it, so some action there. Meanwhile, the Health Minister has some other concerns, and that's the outbreak in Victoria you mentioned, Kieran. The spike in cases over the weekend, including many from unknown sources, indicates wider community transmission and has federal authorities quite worried about the level of community transmission.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are worried. I'll be talking to Tanya Plibersek on that shortly. Finally, we'll catch up with you later this hour, but on the banks, the Treasurer and the Prime Minister had discussions with the banks about their ongoing support for those, not just business people, but everyday people with mortgages.
Yeah, Josh Frydenberg and the banks on Friday and the PM, and they received assurances that the banks will continue to give repayment holidays on a case-by-case basis to people who find themselves on the dole past September. The banks told the government many people were using the $10,000 in superannuation they've been allowed to access to keep the wolf away from the door. The government believes the banks understand businesses and the unemployed in places like Cairns in particular, worst affected by the pandemic, need a break past September, which was when the government initially got a guarantee from them they would give people a break until there's photos of Cairns Airport that we showed this week and the ferry terminal there completely empty. Just also wanted to mention, Kieran, with the Eden Monaro by-election happening this Saturday, the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister are due in Yass tomorrow to announce $400 million in local roads funding, I'm told, but that does not include money for the Barton Highway. Very interesting, speaks to the closeness of the contest that the PM's due to head there again. I've also been told today that a Sunday newspaper report that the dole will increase by $75 a week by the end of September is not accurate. I think there will be an increase, but it's yet to be decided.
Yeah, well, my advice from a senior government source this morning is that they are moving towards, obviously, considering job seeker on that July statement, but not a permanent change, Andrew, that they're still looking at temporary movements on that front. So we'll see. Thank you. We'll talk to you later this hour.